can't really predict the next wave of COVID-19 infections right now, and that's the view coming from epidemiologist Professor Alex Welte. Some health experts have been warning that the next wave of infections will be around May and will be driven by a new variant. Now, Professor Alex Welte joins us now to explain why he doesn't agree with this, and he's a research professor at the Center for Epidemiological Modeling and Analysis. Prof, good to have you, and good morning to you. You don't necessarily agree that we can predict necessarily the new wave of COVID-19 infections right now. Why is this so?
Well, I mean, as you yourself said, the view being expressed there is that something will happen and it's going to be to do with a new variant. But a new variant is the result of a random event, which is the appearance of a new version of the virus. And there's no sort of machine that has a schedule that pops out these variants. It's just a random sort of error that gets made in the replication of the virus within somebody, and then that new version has to be transmitted. It has to have just the right properties to be transmissible, to make people sick enough to actually, cough up the droplets and so on. And so we cannot predict things like that. We can say that given what's been happening over the last 2 years or so, that it's quite likely it's going to happen again. But we really don't know when, and we don't know whether the previous little jumps in the variations have made it more difficult to get to a yet more effective variant. So right now, the Omicron variant and some minor subvariants of that are the most transmissible things that we've seen. And so it's very difficult to say, this is how long it's going to take before something comes along that's just a bit better than that, and then gets out of the bottle and then gets out and about and becomes a significant threat. I don't see how one can predict things like that.
Right. So,
it's a complicated story.
So you're saying there aren't any new alarming variants, to your knowledge, that we should be aware of, or at least worried about, or expect at least, or even headed our way here in South Africa, even though we hear more information about subvariants, as you've made references to, but nothing alarming that you're aware of?
No, I mean, I think people put things out in the news and they say, oh, we've seen this little thing. And actually, so far, I feel that the scientists that have worked on this, and I'm not patting myself in the back because I'm not working on that, have been quite measured in how they've put the news out. And, when the Omicron variant was detected, even then, it was a very serious thing. And they put out a fairly, nice little presentation where they said, this is what we've seen. It does look like it's very transmissible. And they were absolutely correct. And it was the first time in a while that they'd made a sort of a major announcement, and it turned out to be a big thing. So I think the people who look at these things give it a fair deal of thought. And, the reports so far have been very unhysterical and have just said, well, we can see this, the minor variation and that minor variation. And I am not aware that we should be panicking about those things or making a list of which things to watch and be afraid of. It's not like that at the moment.
Yep.
I just want to add that,
yes.
But on this issue of coming waves, it's also not that our immunity to Omicron is somehow permanent, or that the effect of vaccines is permanent. So right now, the reason we don't have a lot of transmission is because so many South Africans have immunity to Omicron and its subvariants, and that's either because of vaccination or because they've had it. And that immunity doesn't last forever. So even if there's no major variation, inevitably over time, our collective immunity will fade. And then at some point, we're likely to get a bit of an upsurge. But again, when that's going to happen, how severe it will be, very difficult to predict. But if there's no new variant, it should be a fairly slow process and no sudden terrible outbreaks.
Right. I think, Doc, what's also in our faces is the messages and messaging, rather, from government, right? Especially when talking about, suspected waves, future waves, potential waves. Often it seems the messaging says to avoid an upcoming wave, make sure that you sanitize, make sure that you wear your mask, etc. What do you make of, some of the regulations that are still in place now? Are they still effective, particularly the likes of sanitizing from one shop to another, the monitoring, of course, of our temperatures, etc. Of course, with the messaging again to avoid a future potential wave. What do you make of those?
Well, I think that trying to be up to date on your vaccine shots is a really good idea. I try to do that. I encourage people to do that. I don't think we need to get all heavy-handed and talk about mandatory vaccination. I think wearing a mask indoors, if I'm not at home, is a good idea. But the hand washing and the temperature taking, this has always been a waste of time, and it's certainly a waste of time now.
also, I'm worried about, the type of mask that we wear. I had a conversation with Professor Shabir Mahdi a couple of weeks ago, and he was mentioning that, yes, we encourage mask wearing, but do we encourage the right type of mask to wear, do you think, Prof? We know that's still a regulation for indoors. You need to wear your mask. But what do you make of us having all these different types of masks, but we're not even aware or educated enough whether that's even effective or not?
Right. So, if you go almost, 2 years back when the initial discussions came about, should everybody be wearing a mask, what are the important things? At that point, there were some articles, comparing different types of masks and the pros and cons. That conversation has gone rather quiet. I think Shabir Mahdi is correct to raise the point that, wearing a very thin buff around your neck and mouth probably doesn't really do much. Wearing a mask that's got sort of great big holes or your nose is sticking out, that doesn't really help much either. Unfortunately, not everybody can afford to pay, 40 Rand a pop for, a slightly higher grade mask at the pharmacy, and they have to improvise with something cheaper and multiply reusable. I think the point is it's better than nothing to wear a reasonable mask that it looks something like a cloth over your nose and mouth, and if it's a bit thicker than a little thin buff, that's a good thing. I think this is a difficult question. It's simply not practical for the billions of people in the world or the millions here in South Africa to all get good quality masks. And so maybe even that measure is a little bit of security theater, maybe to some extent. But if we do what we can, I do believe it's significantly better than doing nothing.
Well, I appreciate you, of course, speaking to us this morning. Epidemiologist, Professor Alex Welte, thank you so much for your time this morning.